I've been reading this book, okay, and it's volume 2 there's only 2 volumes of a book that I'd already read, and yeah, I've been reading it this week, and I want to talk about it because it's kind of relevant to this holiday weekend, the July 4th holiday. So anyway, the volumes 1 and 2, the titles of the book are The Astonishing Life of Octavian Nothing, Traitor to the Nation. Volume 1 was called The Pox Party, and Volume 2, which I'm reading right now, and I actually planned on finishing it before I made this video, but you know me and finishing things, so Volume 2 is called The Kingdom on the Waves. Volume 1, when I read it, one of my friends, when we were a lot younger, suggested to me to read it, and I only just read it like a couple months ago, and when I read it, it became one of my new favorite books that I've read, and a book that really challenged me to think about the world differently. And Volume 2 is kind of doing the same thing in like a it's not as exciting for me to read personally as Volume 1, but it's still challenging my perceptions of things. And so anyway, Octavian, the protagonist of the book, is he grows up in the colonial Boston in 1700s, and we follow his story through his life as the revolution sparks, and through the revolution he fights actually in the revolution, and it kind of follows like his childhood, his perception, and what is actually going on. But Octavian's life isn't just a regular old, colonial American chap. He actually ends up fighting for the loyalist side. He fights for the British. So Octavian himself is African. His mother was African, and she was kidnapped, and she was brought to the United States, and he lived with like this group of scientists, and they had experiments. He escaped, blah blah. He was a slave, all of these things, and so now in Kingdom of the Waves, he's fighting for the Loyalist Army, and I'm getting real anxious because the book is like in June of 1776 right now, and I'm just like, oh man, they got 1 month. What is he gonna do? And so, anyways, my point is, it's historical fiction, and it's told from this particular perspective that you wouldn't traditionally expect to find from this particular era. And it's really good. I talk about this book forever, but anyway, so my point, I said my point is already. Anyway, in school, when we learned this history of the Revolutionary War, and you learned it basically, I think, like every year through, I was in first grade when I first came to the United States. Like, as far back as like second grade, every year I can remember when we learned social studies, we learned about the Revolutionary War, and we learned about George Washington's army, and we learned how the Constitution was made, and all of that stuff. And then later we went through the Civil War, which was like 100-year gap. And when I was learning that, I think I remember in 7th or 8th grade, I remember knowing that George Washington and the Thomas Jefferson, the people, they were slave owners, and knowing that like this whole fight for freedom from Britain, about life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, being aware that that was for them, and it was for the white man. It was just for them, really, that they were fighting, and it was only really later that got expanded to more of the population. Okay, my point is that I am not traditionally American, I guess. Like, I obviously consider myself an American, but I am a child of immigrant parents, so when I was learning this, I wasn't learning about the history of my forefathers. And so I think that, I looked at it more objectively. And in retrospect, I'm starting to think about how when I was a kid, I feel like the struggle of the abolition of slavery and all of that stuff, it didn't even come in, like we didn't even talk about it until the Abraham Lincoln era part of social studies, until that chapter. And if you think about it, like there are 100 years in between there, and that's not news to me or anything. Reading about Octavian's journey and all the struggles that he faced, and how he actually initially fought on the rebel side for freedom from Britain, and then was told he wasn't allowed to be a part of that side anymore because he was property. And it's historical fiction, but I think there are many parts of this theme. There are many themes of the story that very ring true to the actual history, and I think we don't really think about that history when we're learning it for the first time or second time or third time or fourth time in school. And I've been thinking more as I read this book that there's maybe a problem with that. Maybe we should be, I don't know. I just wish as a kid, someone had talked to me more about that. We always learned about American history, and in that time frame, we never talked about the struggle of anyone besides the white man. In United States history, we kind of talked about the Native Americans, but not really. I had to take an ethnic studies class in high school to even learn about a lot of the civil rights movement of different ethnicities. And I think it kind of speaks to how much diversity maybe isn't being taught. And I don't know if that's maybe what my state standards were when I went through it, but I do think it had an impact on the community that I grew up in and how the people tend to think about things. Oh, wow. I've been talking for 7 minutes. All right. I'm going to stop, but food for thought. If you have no kids or younger kids, this Independence Day weekend, think about how that dream that was constructed in 1776, it took a long time for it to be expanded to more of the population, and we will always have to continue to work to expand it to get to everybody. What? Okay. Have a happy 4th of July weekend to my people who are Canadian. Belated Happy Canada Day. Okay, bye.